Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk. And I apologize ahead of time if there's not as good sound quality in this recording as some of my others. I've do my recordings on my phone and I upgraded to the iPhone 15 and my microphone is not compatible with that. So I am having to do it on my normal speaker that comes on the phone. So I guess we'll see how good the iPhone 15 speaker is. But there may be a little background road noise going on as I'm making the recording as well. Not that I would be doing that while I was driving, but with the AI optimization that I also apply to these recordings, it can be good at covering up some of that noise, anyways. So, on this episode of God Talk, we're going to kind of continue with the political theme going a little bit here, just because there's just a lot happening right now from the attempted assassination of Trump. I guess it's been about 2 weeks ago. A couple weeks before that, Biden's belly flop in the debate. And mind you, I mentioned that the media would keep going after him and going after him and going after him until he dropped out. And that's exactly what they did. And that's exactly what he did. And now it's back to all things being normal. They're pounding away at Trump and they're making Kamala Harris the next best thing since chocolate ice cream. So there we are. And with that, I had also mentioned that I thought the bullet would make Trump into a new person. And that seemed to have been a little bit short-lived because his brief call for unity in the Republican National Convention was well, let's just say it was brief because he's back to pounding away. But it was interesting. The moment is really the first just few minutes of his speech where he spoke in terms of unity and we're all Americans. That was very almost Reagan-esque. It was visionary. It was uniting people on what we can be versus what we're not. And I thought that was interesting that he moved away from it so quickly because I thought it was powerful and effective, especially because that's something that you don't normally hear a lot out of him in terms of his campaigning and such. All that to be said, what I'd like to speak about on this podcast was an opportunity that I had to review an upcoming movie that is coming out the end of August, and it is on Reagan. And I don't know how I got chosen for it. I think they were certainly looking for pastors and people that might be able to promote the movie in their church or take a group to the movie theater or different things like that. They probably also narrowed it down by age, people who were around when Reagan was president and were impacted by it. Or maybe they just knew I had an autographed copy of one of Reagan's pictures, and it's not a copy. It's like legit autographed with his very own hand from when he was a governor of California. Maybe they knew somehow, some way that I have that picture, which is incidentally, I got that picture from my journalism professor and history professor in college. He used to be Republican, and then he had turned gay, and he was pretty liberal. And so when he had quit working at the college, he had a big garage sale, and he was selling his picture of Reagan, and I was interested in it. And I think he sold it to me for 50 cents. I'm 95% sure I got that picture autographed by his very own hand back when he was governor for 50 cents. The last time I checked about 10 years ago, I think that picture was worth about $1,500. That is a good, what you would call return on investment. Buy something for 50 cents and it being worth $1,500, maybe even more. But the movie, I was very impressed with it. In fact, so I'm just going to say when this movie comes out, if you're a Reagan fan, it is a must see. And even if you're not a Reagan fan, I would highly recommend it as well. It's just a good movie. Dennis Quaid plays Reagan. Having been a fan of Reagan, and it took a little bit getting used to trying to see Dennis Quaid play Reagan. Also, like they use him for Reagan's early life to his later life, and I don't know how old he is, but Dennis Quaid, that is, but he's not young. So he plays the old Reagan much better than he plays the young Reagan because there's no amount of makeup that they can apply that will really cause you to think that you're looking at someone who's maybe in their early 30s or something, as they just tell his whole life, really from childhood through his death. And I knew a lot about Reagan, but there was things that I didn't know that I learned on the movie. Not too many things, but a couple of things. But what was interesting is that the manner by which they tell the story, and they basically have this new upcoming Russian spy who's trying to learn from the master Russian spy teacher, and he basically tells him what kind of person he looks for in people to figure out who they need to watch out for, and it leads him into basically telling the story of Ronald Reagan to this underling spy, Russian spy. So just kind of an interesting premise by which they tell the story, but it was a good movie. And here's what I like most about Reagan, especially in today's political times, is Reagan was really, even though he was hardcore conservative, he was a uniter of people. And when I say a uniter of people, like even his enemies liked him. His political enemies. There's a scene where Tip O'Neill is introducing himself to Reagan after Reagan is elected president, and he basically warns Reagan that they're gonna have some tough battles. And Reagan said, "You know what? That's fine. You just need to realize that 6 p.m. comes every day." And Tip O'Neill says, "Well, what do you mean by that?" He says, "Well, at 6 p.m., we're not enemies anymore. We're just a couple of Irishmen that are going to drink beer together." And right away, you could see he just won the respect of this political foe, this political adversary. Earlier in the movie, I think this was when he was governor of California. Berkeley, the students at Berkeley were doing a sit in protest and so forth. And he goes on campus to talk to the faculty and so forth. And as he's leaving, the students are having a silent protest. And so they've got things covering their mouths and they're lining the hallways that he's walking through. And he walks through everyone as their mouths are covered. And when he gets to the far end of the protest, he turns back, looks at him, puts his finger over his mouth and says, "Shh." And like they make a big deal that a bunch of the students just start laughing, right? Like he's just human. You might disagree with him, but he treats you with respect. Even Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, they struck a relationship. And at Reagan's funeral, you have Gorbachev, who thought so highly of Reagan, came to pay his respects at the funeral. And I have to tell you, in today's day and age, with the political situation the way that it is a rare thing that you find people treating each other with respect. In fact, as I was watching this past week, I was watching the hearings having to do with the director of the Secret Service, and I have to tell you, like for most of the people that were grilling her, especially the Republicans, they were so incredibly rude. I mean, like you can have convictions, but you're supposed to be professionals. And so conduct yourself like a professional. I mean, do we want our kids to learn this is how you're supposed to speak to other people and how professionals talk to other professionals? And it's just the manner by which people talk to one another is just absolutely I my mom always said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Well, in politics, you still have to say stuff, but you can treat the other person with respect. And that just doesn't go on nowadays. And it's very, 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 very disheartening. What's also disheartening is just the lack of the lack of people being able to think critically anymore. I have to tell you, like I mentioned the other day in a sermon, that a third of all Democrats think that Trump faked his own assassination. And it's like, what level of thinking and lack of thinking, what level of brainwashing, what level of hatred, what level of like worms eating your brains has to be going on that a third of all Democrats in a poll thought he had rigged his own assassination. Likewise, I'm having to listen to my diehard Republican friends try to convince me that like Biden's dead and that, that I mean, he's dead when he's alive. And like how 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 do you think that? How do you think he's dead when he's alive? And then his speeches are AI speeches because he's dead. And then when he does speeches, it's really not him doing the speeches because his hands are like younger than his face. And like I zoomed in on it, and no, my hands are a lot younger than his. And he's got me by 30 years, but his hands look like, I mean, just the stuff that goes on both sides is it I don't understand it. I mean, common sense is no longer common, and it's on both sides. I Someone sent me a little saying earlier today, and I think it fits well with this podcast. And it says, in the next 160 some days, however long it is between now and the election, it said, don't let the elephants and the donkeys make you not be a lamb. And that's ultimately who God calls us to be, is to be lambs, to be children of God. And we can't allow politics to cause that to change. We should be supporting candidates that hold views that are in line with the direction that we should be going as a country, in line with the Bible, and those are the people that we need to support. But what breaks my heart is we've got a country that is so divided that we believe nonsense. We've got a country that's so divided that people who talk to one another and question one another and are trying to get to the truth on things talk down to other people. Just you know, do everything that they can to try to humiliate them. And that's just not how we treat people. It's not how we treat people as Christians. It's not how we should, as Americans, we should be better than that. And to go back to the Reagan movie, this is a guy who, part of the Screen Actors Guild, he took on the communist influence that was going on earlier in his career as he was an actor, and he was elected as part of this, the Screen Actors Guild, and he's going after these communists and is sticking up for the industry. And then he did it as president of the United States. I mean, he stood up to the Russians, or at that time Soviet Union. He's the one that stood there at the border between East and West Germany and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," which no one wanted him to say because it was divisive and it could potentially cause more conflict, and everyone was scared of what might happen with the Soviet Union. But through his charm and through his courage, he went a long ways as being the one that caused them to lose the Cold War. And man, I would just wish that we would have a politician today that could stand up for conservative principles and not be rude about it, not be arrogant about it, not talk down to other people, but to speak God's truth with compassion and with love. And since no politician's going to do it, as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, I implore all of you in your own conversations, do that, because there's no excuse. There's just no excuse to treat other people with a disdain and a bitter hatred that we're doing in today's society. Whether or not someone's a Republican or a Democrat, whether or not someone is a believer or not believer, as humans, we've been made in the image of God, and we're called to reflect the love of Christ. And so it's just heating up. It's just heating up. And you're going to hear this from me again and again and again. Like, I'm going to constantly speak up on the issues and for what we're called to do and to be as followers of Christ. And that is to support those who would get behind and support the values that God calls for us to uphold. But the other part, and we've got to keep up with that as well. I mean, you can't just do one side. Like, God calls for us to support these values that he calls for us to live by, but he also calls for us to speak truth in love. It's clear in Scripture that is what we're to do. It's what Jesus did, even as he dealt with the sinners. And it's what Jesus did, even as he dealt, before Pilate and Herod. He didn't mouth off to him. He didn't speak condescendingly. He spoke truth, but he spoke it in love. So to put a wrap on this thing, I encourage you, when that movie comes out later this summer, watch the movie. It's an awesome movie. And may God give us a leader like Reagan that not only holds those values, but can unite a country under a common vision to restore a broken nation. That's what Reagan did. And I pray that God would allow us to do that again. And in your conversations, whenever you can, speak truth, but speak it in love. Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to talking to you next time. God bless.